Welcome to Walking the Torah Portions. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion Re'eh. This week's Torah portion is Deuteronomy 11:26 through 16:17. The Haftarah this week is Isaiah 54:11 through 55:5. Re'eh means see, as in our opening line, which reads, "See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse." Deuteronomy 11:26. This week's Torah portion continues in Deuteronomy 11. Moses is laying before the people a choice, a fork in the road, if you will. There are only two options: obedience to the Holy One, or walking in our own understanding. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, which I command you today, and the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, but turn aside from the way that I am commanding you today, to go after other gods that you have not known. Deuteronomy 11:27 and 28. Following after other gods and walking in our own way is actually one and the same. Remember when smartphones were a new thing? And one of the taglines you'd always hear is, "There's an app for that." In other words, whatever you wanted to do on your new smartphone, there was an app that you could do it through. In the ancient world, they believed in a pantheon of gods. So you could say, there's a god for that. Whatever your flesh wanted to do, there was a deity that supposedly had some control over that area, or had incorporated immoral behavior into their worship. So by attaching your fleshly desires to one or more of these gods, it made it a socially acceptable behavior in that time. Today, we do the same actions, just without attaching a pagan god or goddess to it. We justify it with the norms in our society or the norms of a particular group, or we just do it because we feel like it without trying to justify it. The bottom line is, if our actions don't line up with God's expectations of us, we are following our own gods, which are in fact us. The ancients were no different. The pagan gods that they followed were in fact their own flesh. This portion, Re'eh, and the following two portions, Shoftim and Ki-Tzei, contain the bulk of the Torah commandments listed in the book of Deuteronomy, or Devarim. These are the statutes and rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess all the days that you live on the earth. Deuteronomy 12:1. The first commandment given is to utterly destroy all the pagan places of worship in the Promised Land. The places mentioned are the mountains and the hills, which would be considered the high places, and the Asherim and other pagan altars within the groves of trees. You shall not worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, in that way, but you shall seek the place that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and to make his habitation there. Deuteronomy 12:4 and 5. The Holy One doesn't want to be worshipped in the same ways and in the same places as the pagan gods. He has set up his days of worship, his Shabbat, and his annual feast days, and set his place of worship to be Jerusalem. You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing whatever is right in his own eyes. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, is giving you. Deuteronomy 12:8 and 9. All of the Torah commands related to offerings, first fruits, the firstborn, vows, etc., 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 could not be fully followed in the wilderness or in exile like we are. While we are in exile, we too, for the most part, are doing what is right in our own eyes. And I don't mean that as being rebellious. But without living in the land with a temple and a functioning priesthood, you just can't do the Torah 100% as it's prescribed and laid out in the Torah. Most all of us are in exile and doing Torah the best we can where we are. And that's exactly what we need to be doing. Hopefully, over time, our Torah walk has improved and continues to improve. But one day soon, our King and High Priest, Yeshua, will show us the way, and then we can all truly walk in echad. However, you may slaughter and eat meat within any of your towns, as much as you desire, according to the blessing of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, that he has given you. The unclean and the clean may eat of it, as of the gazelle and as of the deer. Only you shall not eat the blood. You shall pour it out on the earth like water. Deuteronomy 12:15 and 16. This is a change to how things have been done in the wilderness, but the blood is always prohibited. In the wilderness, if you wanted to slaughter and eat a sacrificially kosher animal, something from the herd or the flock, one that wasn't already a required offering elsewhere, you would still have to bring it to the tabernacle and offer it as a peace offering. This was because the tabernacle was very close to everyone in the wilderness. It was sitting in the midst of the camp. Once they inhabit the promised land, though, most would be living a good distance from the tabernacle and later the temple. So this gave them the freedom to enjoy a steak or a lamb chop, even if they didn't live nearby. Take care that you do not neglect the Levite as long as you live in your land. Deuteronomy 12:19. Another reason for having them bring all the herd and flock animals to the tabernacle as peace offerings is that a portion of these offerings were to be given to the Levites as their portion. This was their helping to train the tribes to take care of the Levites who have no portion in the land. Our text goes on to enforce that all of our tithes, offerings, and other required offerings are to be brought to the place where Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will place his name, which will eventually be Jerusalem. When Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God cuts off before you the nations whom you go in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? That I also may do the same. You shall not worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God in that way, for every abominable thing that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Deuteronomy 12:29 through 31. Christianity in general, through the Roman Catholic Church, has been very guilty of this prohibition. This was because after abandoning the Torah and attempting to remove themselves from anything that was considered Jewish, they were left with nothing to observe and had to create their own traditions and observances outside of what God actually requires in the Bible. This came about around the 200 to 300 AD era, long after Yeshua and all his disciples, and long after all the documents of the New Testament were written. This continued on in history as Christianity spread through the Crusades. Unable to stop the pagan worship that was ingrained in different areas that they had conquered, they instead co-opted these pagan practices into a form of Christian worship. In essence, worshiping God through pagan worship practices. The part mentioned about burning their children in fire is to show how extreme some of these practices were, and not to condone illicit behavior that stopped just shy of this horrible act. Chapter 13 covers idolatry in the land. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God is testing you to know whether you love Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God with all your heart and with all of your soul. Deuteronomy 13:1 through 3. The Torah is our litmus test to validate if something is actually coming from God. Signs and wonders alone are not proof of someone sent from the Holy One. Their message must also line up with the Torah. This is primarily why Yeshua is not accepted by our Jewish brothers today, because they have been shown a Messiah that nailed the Torah to the cross, so everyone is now free from it. This would clearly be a false prophet, and a false Messiah. Moses also states here that there may be times when false prophets are sent with signs and wonders, but teaching or luring you away from the Torah. This is a test. We see this clearly playing out in Revelation 13 and Revelation 16, as false signs and wonders are performed by the beast and the dragon. There are also many claims by people of faith today that they say that the Holy Spirit led them to do something that clearly violates the Torah. That is not the Holy Spirit, but a deceiving spirit sent to test you. The penalty for being a false prophet, one who leads people astray from God's commandments, is death. And please don't confuse this with someone who doesn't know Torah or doesn't know any better, like most of us were at one point or another before coming into this realization. This is someone who's a leader, who absolutely knows the truth of the Torah and walked in it, but got seduced away and is trying to seduce others away also. We are to purge the evil from our midst because, like a disease, it will spread. It goes on to say that if a false prophet is a close relative, a parent, a child, or even a spouse, they also must be brought to justice. This is very much what the Levites had to do after the incident of the golden calf. They killed all the guilty, even their own family members. If unchecked, this will spread and can infect an entire city. Verse 12 to the end of this chapter actually deals with this situation. If it is investigated and proven, the whole city must be destroyed for its idolatry. And just like the idolatrous cities that they are going into the land to conquer and judge, these cities are also to be utterly destroyed. Everyone and thing is to be killed, and the contents are burned. This is because these cities are not just being conquered, they are also being judged by the Holy One. The cities here in chapter 13 can also never be rebuilt. It will remain as a visual reminder of what happens to a city of idolatry. You are the sons of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God. You shall not cut yourselves or make any baldness on your foreheads for the dead, for you are a people holy to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 14, 1 and 2. We are the sons and daughters of the Most High, and we are a segulah, which is a treasured possession of his. We don't injure or scar ourselves for the dead, because we are children of life, and are so forbidden to walk around representing death. You shall not eat any abomination. Deuteronomy 14:3. Verses 3 through 21 review the kosher laws that were given to us in Leviticus 11. What we eat may seem like an insignificant or a minor thing to us, but it seems to have a very significant impact to God. Remember that sin was actually brought into this world through breaking a food commandment. Beyond what animals are kosher, it also reiterates that we don't eat anything that has already died before slaughter, anything that died of natural causes or disease. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year, and before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God in the place that he will choose, to make his name dwell there. You shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock. And you may learn to fear Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God always. Deuteronomy 14, 22 and 23. This passage is referring to the second tithe, as it's known. This tithe is separate from the normal tithe, which would all be given to support the Levites and the priests. Instead, this tithe is to be brought to Jerusalem to enjoy during the pilgrimage feasts, as it says, and you shall eat there before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, and rejoice, you and your household. Deuteronomy 14:26. The feast times are times of joy, And this tithe ensures that you have enough to celebrate and enjoy these times. It also states that if the journey is too far, that the second tithe can be sold for money, the money brought to Jerusalem, and then exchanged for whatever offerings or wine or drinks that you may wish to enjoy at the feast times. At the end of every 3 years, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in the same year and lay it up within your towns. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your towns, shall come and eat and be filled, that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God may bless you in all the work of your hands that you do. Deuteronomy 14:28 and 29. This is known as the third tithe, or the poor tithe, for the Levite, the sojourner, the orphan, and the widow. Our Father cares for those in need, and so should we. At the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release, and this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh's release has been proclaimed. Deuteronomy 15:1 and 2. Chapter 15 begins with reviewing the Shemitah, or year of release. It warns us not to be stingy about loaning to the poor when the Shemitah is near. Because there is a release, people would be reluctant to make a big loan if they had to forgive the debt, if the term came very shortly. In verse 12, it reviews the laws regarding Hebrew slaves, or better said bondservants, who also have a 7-year max term of servitude. Verse 19 reviews the laws regarding the firstborn males from the flock and from the herd. The end of our portion reviews the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, for in the month of Abib, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God brought you out of Egypt by night. Deuteronomy 16:1. Pesach is the first of the 3 pilgrimage feasts. The Hebrew word Abib means tender or green. This speaks of the spring, when everything is tender and green, and is the month of Nisan. You shall count 7 weeks. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God blesses you. Deuteronomy 16:9 and 10. Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, is the second pilgrimage feast. You shall keep the Feast of Booths 7 days, when you have gathered in the produce from your threshing floor and your winepress. Deuteronomy 16:13. The third pilgrimage feast is Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Booths, depending on your translation. There's a commandment with this feast that actually we are to keep it with joy. And we finally end with 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God at the place that he will choose, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Booths. They shall not appear before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God that he has given you. Deuteronomy 16:16 and 17. To appear before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh at the place that he chooses is to be at the tabernacle or the temple, with your required tithes and offerings, which is the responsibility of the head of the household, which would almost always be the father, who is a male. And that's why we get that all the males shall appear before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. We are told not to show up to his feast empty-handed, because we would not show up empty-handed to an earthly king either. And finally, we're all to bring our offerings in proportion to how God has blessed us. We have before us the blessing and the curse. Let us choose blessing and life. Let us shun idolatry and validate everything by the standard of God's Word. And let us do the best we can do to uphold the Torah in exile. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One with love in Echad. Shalom.